Welcome everyone to the KU Law live series episode, Meet Your Professors. I'm Steven Freedman, I'm the Assistant Dean of Admissions. Brianna Honshu is my erstwhile colleague, Director of Admissions. I think I used that word properly. Professor Ware is observing this first part. Tonight's event will be in two halves. The first half, we'll talk about the first year experience. Also joining us, Professor Six, over there, there's the wave, Professor Ewell, and Professor Mulligan. And Professor Ewell and Mulligan get the bonus. They're going to be in both parts of tonight's event. They are, yes, they get double the excitement. And we definitely hope you all join for both parts. I don't think I missed anybody. So really, gosh, I see so many folks that I recognize. It's really good to see you all. I'm going to start off just by briefly giving an overview of the first year of law school, because I think a lot of people, when they get to this point, there's a lot of mystery about what's going to happen, and so this is to kind of remove some of that mystery and tell you what it is. And at any time, you can ask questions either in the chat room or by unmuting yourself and asking questions. After I spend about 5 minutes talking about that, we are just going to open it up to questions. I do have some pre-scripted questions to get the conversation going, but you guys are going to have the best questions. So I definitely encourage you to chime in with your questions. So let me just do a share screen and get back to my slides here. So I just want to briefly show you what the curriculum is at KU Law. It generally takes 3 years to graduate from KU Law. You need 90 credits. The first year, there you go. There's the first year. So I'm going to keep this super simple. The first year for fall starters, you take 4 classes in the fall and 4 classes in the spring. You take Lawyering 1 and Lawyering 2. Professor Six is our lawyering faculty member joining us tonight, and she's going to talk about what that means. And that is 3 credits in the fall, 2 credits in the spring. Then in the fall, we have all the other classes are big 4-credit, what we call doctrinal classes. So civil procedure, contracts and torts in the fall, and then in the spring, constitutional law, property, and criminal law. Pretty straightforward. So in your first year, if you're a fall starter, you don't have any electives. If you're a summer starter, it's a little different. We did have a big session on that last week, but I'm happy to answer questions about that as we go on. So first year, no electives. Second and third year, pretty much all electives. You have a few requirements. I'll just go over them briefly here. Professional responsibility, everybody's got to take that. And then you take 3 of the courses from a list of basic foundation. These are all courses that are going to be on the bar exam that not everyone chooses to take. So we're going to kind of make you eat your spinach a little bit. I mean, they're great courses, Professor Ware, Secured Transactions, and you should take them even if they weren't required. But just in case, we're going to make you take 3 of them because these are traditional bar courses, and they're good to get you prepared for the bar exam. We have upper level writing requirements where you have to basically take 3 classes. Generally, that's either 3 classes or 2 classes and something like moot court or law review or the Journal of Law and Public Policy. And then we also have a 6-credit minimum requirement for experiential learning courses. You can take up to 15 credits. And that's it. That's my overview of the KU Law curriculum. I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the meat on the bones before we get into some of the other types of questions. So, I had my list of questions on another thing. So let me start, but I can start with one. So professors, tell us about the Socratic Method. What is the Socratic Method? And how is it used at KU Law?
Professor Mulligan, do you use the Socratic Method?
I mean, don't all jump in at once.
To a degree, I do. Yeah. So the Socratic method is a process in which instead of merely lecturing at the students, and the students then take all the wonderful pearls of wisdom that Professor Mulligan or Professor Ewell or Professor Ware, Professor Six might drop. Rather, the professor would ask you questions. Often in the first year, that revolves around cases. So we would ask questions about the case. What did you read? Can you recite? Can you give us the details of that case and what was the ruling and these sorts of things? We might have opportunities to ask questions on hypotheticals, pushing from that space. The Socratic method is designed to be very anxiety producing and to really be a horrible experience that you can cry about. Really, the Socratic method can be, if it by some faculty not at KU can feel abusive, but I think here most of us who engage in that either have some sort of modified version of it or are really looking at it as an opportunity for you to be held accountable. Are you doing the reading? Do we know what's going on? Opportunities for you to practice public speaking and public thinking on your feet skills, and opportunities for you then just to view your colleagues and making sure that, hey, am I where I need to be in understanding these cases? So I'll do that some, usually around reciting what happened in this case, or what does this rule require us to do. I myself in my first year classes will do a lot of then talk to your neighbor opportunities, where I'll have hypotheticals based on a case. We'll spend, depending on how challenging the question is, 60 seconds or 2 minutes discussing with our neighbor, how would we resolve this legal issue? And then we might do sort of report backs. So my classes would spend a lot of that time, but each of us are going to do things a little bit differently. Professor Ewell, what do you do in your classes?
I occasionally when I am super hardcore and like have my life together, I might engage in a little bit of Socratic dialogue. But I tend to live in the land of adventure. And I venture pretty far from Socratic dialogue on the daily. You know what I'm really excited about right now is this assignment. I already told my students, my first year property students, I teach property, yay, that they should tell me if they're going to hate this, because we have a class coming up and the class assignment is to take a walk and film themselves taking a walk and identifying all the stuff from the case reading and the statutory reading that they'll do. I also, the other day in class, we played hot potato. We watched movies and then try to apply the rules that you read in the cases that we might have, fleshed out from Socratic dialogue or in conversation, in dialogue with one another, to the movies or a song or a picture. The other day I did it with a picture and the students were like, Professor Ewell, they said Socratic dialogue was a gauntlet. You said, here's a picture, comment. But I think it's super fun. And we got to look at art.
Since I called on Professor Ewell, I'm going to empower myself one more. I'll call on Professor Six. What does a lawyering class is going to look really different? What's a day in the life of a lawyering class look like?
Right. So the purpose of the Socratic method is to try to make thinking visible. So part of what we're trying to teach you in law school is how lawyers think. And that's kind of a hard thing to teach, right? Because the thinking is invisible and goes on in your brain. And so what we try to do in lawyering is help make that thinking visible, but in different ways, by talking about how lawyers write their thinking, which then ultimately helps you practice the thinking that goes behind the writing and ultimately supports the writing. So our class is quite different in that we're not focused on the substance. We will use some substance to practice the writing, but we're focused more on the process or the methodology that lawyers use to think and ultimately communicate.
That's great. One thing, I should probably have our faculty introduce themselves too, shouldn't I? Why don't you guys say who you are and what you're going to be teaching this year?
So I'm Professor Six, not Professor Seven or Professor Eight. I'm Professor Six, and I teach lawyering skills, as you just heard. I also run the academic support program at the law school. So I help all students who are sort of flummoxed in the moment or struggling in some way to reach their full potential. And I've been doing this for, I don't know, close to maybe 17 years. And my favorite thing is when a new group of 1Ls comes in, they're just all bright-eyed and sometimes a little bit terrified. And so I love the opportunity to help put them at ease and help guide them on their journey. Professor Ewell?
I am Professor Ewell. I teach in a lot of different places in the curriculum, but in the 1L curriculum, my home is property, and that is the most important class that you take during law school. So I'm glad I get to teach it.
Well, them's fighting words, of course. But you're right. I'm Lumen Mulligan. Professor Mulligan. I don't teach golf, but I teach civil procedure, which is how does a civil suit, as opposed to the criminal justice system, but how does a civil lawsuit start, proceed, come to a conclusion, and maybe go to appeal? And so for many, I've also had the privilege to teach contracts and lawyering in the 1L curriculum. So I'm happy to visit with folks about any of those different parts of the 1L experience.
I have a question that we get often. How is KU Law's first year program similar to other law schools, and how is it different from other law schools?
So I think a big thing to know is that those core set of courses, and this is really actually, I think, important and exciting. The core set of courses are, Professor Six talked about law school being about teaching you how to think like a lawyer. How do lawyers think? Well, it's also about introducing you to a common legal patrimony, a common culture, and a common language. So the core courses that you take, contracts, Civ Pro, that's what we call it for short, civil procedure, contracts, torts, criminal law, constitutional law, property. Those are courses that law students across the nation, regardless of their school, will take, so that no matter where you go, you share this common relationship. But KU takes and makes that personal to you in some ways that I already saw that Professor Six once.
Well, let me say that one of the ways in which KU Law is different is that a lot of schools, the people who teach what I teach would call it legal research and writing. But we call it lawyering skills because we are going to go beyond just sort of teaching you the basics of legal research and writing. And we're going to try to connect what you're learning to what lawyers do in the practice of law. And we're going to add some additional skills that are usually not taught to all first-year students. So for example, last week, my students engaged in a mock mediation where they negotiated on behalf of a fictional client with mediators who are upper level students participating in our mediation clinic. And so they learned how to advocate on behalf of a client orally in a setting that is very common, which would be in a negotiation. It would be something that lawyers who practice all different kinds of law would participate in. So we also do an exercise early on in the second semester where you interview a client. So you have a fictional client who comes in and you have to interview them and get information from them that you would then use to represent them. So we try to teach you a lot of things about how law school works in the beginning and ultimately about the practice of law. I did see one question in the chat that I thought was a good question for me, which was from Jackie about recommended prep or reading to prepare for your 1L year. So first and foremost, you don't have to do any prep or reading before you come to law school. One thing we will do is have an almost week-long orientation, what we call boot camp, which makes it sound bad. But it's really an opportunity to provide you with that preparation ourselves. And so we will spend several days kind of getting you ready for law school, reviewing some of the 8th grade civics that you may have forgotten, but kind of now need to remember that there are 3 branches of government. And one of them is the judiciary branch. So we'll kind of go through some of that and then begin the process of helping you think like a lawyer and help you think about how to prepare for those classes. But that said, there are some books that you could read, and they run the gamut from, there's a whole plethora of books about going to law school, and then there are just books about lawyers. So I think most important would be to read something that's of interest to you. So if you're nervous about what the law school experience is like and about what it's like to study in law school, then I think reading one of the books, and I'm happy to provide individual recommendations for some, but those many books that talk about how to prepare for law school can help set you at ease and give you some confidence. But I think it's also great to go read like a civil action or some other book about just what lawyers do to kind of get you in the mindset to prepare you to begin that process of thinking how lawyers represent clients.
I might jump in on this. Well, if you're in my Civ Pro class, civil actions on the syllabus, so we'll be touching on that some along the way. I think the original question was what makes KU law unique, and I know Steve and Brianna have surely chatted with you all about this. But our small section program, I think, is special. You'll have at least 3 of your classes with a group of about 22 to 24 students, and then you'll have the rest of your classes with that same cohort of students. So it really you have that first year experience with that group. And what's, I think, pretty neat about that, by having that communal experience, it gives you a real shared understanding. And when I go to reunions 25, 30 years later, people are still seeking out their small section colleagues because they want to know what happened to so-and-so and so-and-so, or they've kept up with them all this time. And so it I think forges friendships, and sometimes not friendships, by having that proximity with each other. And I think that's a special feature about KU Law School. I might take on terms of books you would read. What I would recommend, actually, if you're someone who has not had to be intentional about using your time, let's just say school has come really easy to you and you've always had relatively large amounts of free time and you haven't had to be very intentional in how you plan out your day and use your time effectively. If getting some sort of reading like that would be a benefit to you to be more intentional in how you use your time, that I would recommend that more than any sort of law related piece. There's some people that they have that down, or they had a different life experience. They already have mastered that life skill. But if you're honest with yourself and you say, hey, you know what, that's something I need to work on, I would recommend that as something that I think would be a boon. And then there was a question on, we prepare you for any state's bar, not necessarily the Kansas bar. We have a handful of classes that are very Kansas practice specific, but our JD program is designed for you to go really anywhere, perhaps save Louisiana, which is at least nominally based on French law, but even that anymore is not quite the same that it used to be a number of years ago.
Can I jump in on the books? Because I have a very different perspective than either Professor Six and Professor Mulligan. What my experience over the years has shown me is that law students are entirely too high strung and stressed out. So if you're the person who in March before you start law school are asking what you should do to prepare, what you should do to prepare is like get in touch with the things that really matter in your life. Take a rest because it is so important for you to be like a well-rounded human being. It's cliched today, hashtag self-care. Work on self-care because if that's what you're trying to do now, it's going to be terrible when it comes to November and then when it comes back around to March. So if you really need to get ready for something that's going to not intentionally, like, right? Professor Mulligan was joking when he said he's putting you through gauntlets. That's not what we're trying to do, as was I. That's not what we're trying to do. But law students, for whatever reason, for a broader culture, which maybe your professors will push back against, but we don't control, it is an experience that a lot of people associate with stress and difficulty, and you're learning new stuff. So read a book that you really like if you like reading, or make your amazing Spotify playlist and rock out to it in your socially distanced summer activity or whatever. So that's what I would do. And I think that that actually ties in to the question that came up, which is the typical daily schedule for a 1L. I think, and this ties back to what Professor Mulligan said and what Professor Six said about the kinds of things that might be of interest depending on who you are. The specific schedule is going to look different because, and Professor Mulligan used to have this job, it is very difficult to schedule classes. What's sort of nice for 1Ls is you don't have any choice. So you're going to get into a track, but what's really, really important, and this may be the first time you've had the experience, not only are we required to by our ABA regulations, just the nature of the work that you're going to do means you're going to have, like, for every hour that you're in class, 2 or 3 hours of outside preparation. So the core thing to know about the typical daily schedule for a 1L is that your first year of law school is a full-time job. So think of yourself as working sort of lawyer's hours, because I wouldn't even say it's 9 to 5. It might not be 9 to 8 or 9 exactly, but give yourself a good 12 hours during which you can, while taking care of yourself, think about the endeavor and the process of law school. It might be that you get here and you start at 8 a.m. and then you have a big old break in the middle where you can socialize and study with your friends, or it might be that you start at noon, depending on how the alchemy called scheduling worked out. But what's really important is that law school is a full-time job. We try to support you by creating some requirements that limit your ability to have outside jobs during your first year. There's limited chances for some outside obligations, and that's really because it is a whirlwind. It's an amazing and hopefully fun whirlwind, but it is a rapid change and acclimation that we ask you to go through.
I'll jump on. There's a question in the chat on, can we touch on grading curve distribution? We have 2 different curves. The upper division curve is different from the 1L curve. I'll speak to the 1L curve. Curve is maybe not the right word per se, but our rule is we have a class average that requires the average GPA for the class and a 1L class to come in between 2.8 and 3.0. So that's about like a B- to B average GPA for the class. In addition to that, we have a requirement that 7%, which works out to about 1 person in a small section of the class, receive a C- or lower. So it does force some distribution. That's the rule we have at KU. The overwhelming majority of law schools have some species of curve in the 1L experience. So it is what it is. I think the most important thing to remember out of that for folks is that your first semester and 1L GPA are not you. They're not who you are. They are saying how you performed a certain set of exams at a certain snippet in time. We've been in the mid to low 90s for employment percentage for graduates every year for about 6 to 7 years running. So success, right, is not linked to that. Your goal probably doesn't require you to have a 4.0. So depending, if you say, boy, I really want to be a public defender, or I want to be a plaintiff's lawyer, or I want to work at this nonprofit organization, or I want to be someone who's a leader in family law, or whatever it is, right? So I think it's important to not fall into a trap of defining yourself in terms of some sort of GPA number. It is what it is in that space. The last thing I would say, at least in my class, almost every year, people's grades are higher under the curve than they would be if I took the number of points they scored and divided it by the number of points possible. That's true. So for example, last fall, people were scoring Bs in my class by getting 88 points out of 200, right? That's less than 50%. Those were B scores. So, at least in my class, just taking, a numerator and denominator would not benefit, I don't think, any student. But that's certainly anecdotal.
I want to amplify something that Professor Mulligan said in his reflections on our grading policies. And that was that whatever those grading policies are and whatever happens to be your experience under those grading policies, it is important for students to recognize that that's not the defining feature of you or your career. And that really connects to another question that I see in the chat, which is asking us to think about and describe the relationship among and with professors and students. And I think one of the ways that you make practical and practicable and a reality in your own life, and one of the ways that your professors who operate under these grading policies actualize this idea that you are not your grades, is by forming close and supportive relationships. I don't necessarily think, in the chat it asks if we have an open door policy. I don't think that necessarily is we know what that means in our heads, but I don't necessarily think it reflects the real nature of the relationship, because I'm just going to be honest, my door is always closed in the sense that if you come physically, my door is going to be closed. But if you need me, I am there for you. I have, gotten in my car. I happen to live in Lawrence, Kansas, but we have a lot of students who decide to commute into KU from the Kansas City metro area. And so I've gotten in my car and said, you know what? It's stressful during exam time. There are a whole cohort of you. So let's meet at a coffee house by you, so you don't have to drive all the way out here to get access to me. In these world, in this time, like, we Zoom all the time, but long before Zoom was a part of our reality, I jumped on Zoom with students because maybe I'm traveling as a part of some of the other obligations that I have as a professor, like going to conferences and giving talks, but you need to chat with me. And so let's get on the line and talk. And I will tell you, I probably have a bad reputation because you might find yourself in my office 2 hours after you showed up. So you do need to control your time, because we might talk about all the things that you wanted to talk about, and then we're shooting the breeze, and then we're hanging out, and then we're both late for wherever we need to go next. But that is really emblematic of a broader sense of the ways that the faculty here, and not just the faculty, I want to be honest, we have an amazing staff, right? We've got staff people, from people who are answering the phones, who know the names of students, who students can turn to and go to for support. And that's how, in the face of a grading policy that you experience how you experience, you can help yourself stay grounded. And I always tell people, You know what? I'm going to be honest. I love students who get A's, but I also write recommendations for students who get C minuses, because I've had C minus students who I'm like, I would have want them to work for me at the firm, because, okay, I had to compare them to other people. And I also have denied writing recommendations and being an advocate for students who got A's, because, you know, if your A was a reflection of what you knew when you came in the classroom, then we didn't create a relationship. And great for you, go home and dance with your A, but I don't have anything to say or be an advocate for you other than they came already knowing everything. So yay for them. And all of that is not to say anything other than the relationships matter. And I think this is a place where they're built. I'm gonna call out Professor Six, because the lawyering program generally, but also Professor Six especially, has put in amazing energy in just that topic, and really thinking about how we can create a law school where humans are who we serve, rather than some stats that are reported in the US news or reported to whoever we report stats to. Professor Ewell doesn't even care enough to be able to list more than one.
Right, I will just say that I do think that's one of the ways in which KU stands out from other law schools. I think we are small enough that we really get to know our students. And the lawyering program is set up so that you will get to know your lawyering professor. I will tell you that I engage in something I call live feedback. So when I grade your paper, you sit with me while I do that and we have a conversation about it. And so you will have many opportunities to get to know all of your professors, but you will get to know your lawyering professor, and he or she will be somebody who will be able to write a recommendation letter for you, who will get to know you and find out more about you just than, you know, how well you could write a lawyering paper. So I will tell you that is what I love about teaching. I'm a little bit like Professor Ewell. You can spend a little too much time in my office because I enjoy talking to students so much, but it is definitely a part of what we think is our job. I often say when students are like, oh, I'm sorry to bother you, I'm taking your time. And I always point out they're literally paying me to talk to you. And it is the part of my job that I love the most. Were there some other questions in the chat? I haven't been paying as much attention as I could. Oh, there was a question about frequent 1L mistakes.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So
we could spend all day on that though.
Not hanging out by the admissions office where all the swag is. That's a common mistake. And first floor is where all the free pizza is too. So that's 2 rookie mistakes.
Yeah, and I would say I was one of those law students who was too intimidated to go talk to my professors. And so I would say that one of the greatest things you can do is sort of, if you're not somebody who's otherwise comfortable with that, sort of push past that and kind of force yourself to go talk to your professors and ask stupid questions. I can't tell you how many times a student comes in and says, I'm sure this is a stupid question, and it never is. So I think that's one common mistake. I will say too, in my role as the director of academic resources, I will have students who frequently at the end of their first semester tell me that they made a mistake by approaching law school in the same way that they approached their undergraduate studies. And I do think that law school is a different animal, and it is more than a full-time job. It's as Professor Yuille pointed out, it's a full-time legal job, which is probably more like 60 hours a week. And so I think the most important advice that I give to incoming students is to be learning from your mistakes. I think a lot of students who've been admitted to law school have been really successful in their previous endeavors and have been rewarded for their success with good grades. And so they see those grades as a reflection of of themselves and of their abilities. And law school, as Professor Mulligan pointed out, is really about learning how to learn. And so you can't shy away from that feedback. You can't see assessment as merely a measure of who you are. It has to be a measure of where you are at the moment, and something that you can take and learn from and benefit from and improve. And if you approach law school with that idea in mind, I have like a fly in my house for some reason. If you approach law school with that in mind, then you won't make those kinds of mistakes.
The only thing I would add, because I agree with everything Prof. Six said, and this I think ties in, at least as I think of it, with Professor Ewell's point about self-care. I think that a lot of folks who their undergraduate experience, maybe they just on raw intellectual horsepower sort of was great, and they didn't really have to apply themselves. I think before you start law school is maybe a great time to learn human beings don't multitask well, and pretending that I'm always studying isn't really always studying. I think that if you really focus on a scheme that works for you to actually turn off text, to turn off social media, and actually focus on what you're doing for X amount of time, give yourself a social media back in for 10 or 15 minutes, and then go back to actually doing work for a while, you'll be more productive. And then you could actually be done at 5:30 or 6. Have your time, have your exercise time, have your time with your friends or your family, and actually be off work, as opposed to either literally or metaphorically carrying your backpack around with you all the time. And that learning how to actually do that and to focus and really get the most out of your time really empowers you to have that off time, which I think refreshes you and you'll be more successful. But I think for lots of folks, that's maybe a lesson you haven't had the opportunity to have it as an experiential learning endeavor. So that's where I would go as the biggest one I'll mistake.
And I want to amplify and expand maybe or put in a different context what Professor Mulligan says, because you need to understand like what you're going to do and how you're going to make it work. What are the priorities, right? So if it's exercise, if it's meditation, how do you work that into your day? But I also think it's really important, and this, Professor Six talked about being too timid to talk to your professors. Also believe them. Right? Like, we want you to be successful. And I would have to say the number one lesson, you heard just 3 of us right now talk about wildly different approaches in some ways to getting you the exact same place, which is able to think like a lawyer, problem solve like a lawyer with respect in lawyering generally, in civ pro or property with respect to a particular area of law. That's what we want you to do, and we actually want you to be successful. That doesn't mean we're going to do it the same way. And so when we tell you this is what we're doing in this class, you should not say, well, but when I was in Professor Mulligan's class, what he said is that I should be really prepared for the Socratic Method, even though Professor Ewell said she's going to show me a picture of art and say respond, right? Like, because when you try to respond with what the case said to a picture of art, you're not going to get out of the program what we're trying to help you get out of it, and you're going to wind up bamming your head. And over and over again, law students want to be successful. They think they have found the recipe, and they have decided that they are going to put a bunch of square pegs in round holes because Professor Head's square peg was the one that was beautiful and made of gold, and it is going to be great for his square hole, but the rest of us need you to do something else. And when you believe us and work with us for you to be successful, again, there are grading policies. I can't promise you're going to get an A. When you believe me and do what I ask you to do, believe Professor Mulligan and do what he asks you to do, believe Professor Six, but you're going to walk out of that class prepared for the actual business of being a 2L, a 3L, passing the bar, being a lawyer.
Yeah, and let me just add that I think that we're all trying to teach you the same thing, but there's no one right way to learn it. And there's many right ways to do it. And so part of the value of learning the same thing in different ways is that it will enhance your ability to master those skills and to succeed.